So I'd like to welcome you to HR Masters Wine and Wisdom. And we're just having a conversation today about a very important topic. So Z, I want to thank you for being here and for saying yes and just being so generous with your time.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Michelle.
Indeed. So just to frame the conversation, during the 2021 legislative sessions, there are at least a dozen states that will be considering legislation related to LGBTQ discrimination. And some bills will seek to advance the comprehensive non-discrimination laws that GLGBTQ people seriously need, while others will do just the opposite. It will target GLGBTQ people for unfair and unequal treatment. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that because it's quite timely and topical. So my first question is, how do you identify?
So I identify as gender rich is the term that I use to describe myself. It's not a term people go, oh, well, that's interesting. I've never heard that. Well, no, my wife came up with it. A term that I hear that's very close to it that some folks use to describe themselves is gender expansive. So I fall under the umbrella of transgender. So it describes, there's a lot of different flavors under transgender. The one that you hear probably most is non-binary, describes someone like me. So outside the binary of male, female lives folks like me whose gender identity and gender expression is like, is it a boy or a girl? Yes. It's both, neither, all that, right? And so it took, non-binary doesn't work for me as a term. I know some folks like it because it describes what you aren't. And there's a way like you're living in the space of not being able to be defined. I like gender rich. It works for me. So that is how I define myself, and have for a long time. I've been waiting for these kids, to me, they're kids, to come along and open this space up, because I've been living in this space for decades and decades. Didn't really have terms, didn't have anybody talking about it. And now, my pronoun is they. So again, I've been waiting for that pronoun to come along. I say my pronoun is they or they, sorry, because that's what I get a lot, as people trying and making mistakes and correcting themselves, which is part of the process. I am assigned female at birth, but I'm a they, I'm a gender rich person.
All righty. Well, I actually got to participate in a conversation with, there were about 8 individuals that were interviewed on, similar topics. And they were all millennials, all very young. And they had wonderful terms like you. So you're keeping in step with them. And so they talk about trans joy. And feeling and living trans joy, and they are gender fluid. And so just it takes young people to affect change oftentimes. They're the ones that have the energy and the tenacity to bring about change. So what has it been like for you to just live your life, as you were saying, for decades? You've lived your life without labels. What was that experience like, if you don't mind sharing?
Well, I have to say, I'm white, I'm middle class. I live in Northern California, where there are many like me. I'm free to roam among my people, right? It's way easier for me than a lot of folks. I have to say that, because it's like, there's challenges. Now, I will say there's parts of the country that I don't feel nearly as safe in, and especially with the previous administration and empowering hate. There were places where my wife and I were traveling and I chose not to use the bathrooms there, right? So it kind of depends where you are, but I'm fortunate by virtue of my birth to have a lot of privilege. And so it's not nearly as challenging for me as it is for a lot of other folks. Try being a a trans woman of color, kind of anywhere in the US, it's a very, very different experience. So in that sense, my privilege has allowed me to have it not be as uncomfortable. That said, I live where I live for a reason, because I know it would be a lot more challenging for me in other parts of the country. I grew up in the Midwest, where even though it was a college town, not the same as other parts of the country in terms of safety, just straight up safety. Even in California, when I go to certain parts of California outside of the areas where it's going to be more safe to be trans or gender nonconforming, I don't feel as safe. I feel more like I feel in parts of the Midwest. So it's there's a lot of different sensations in terms of the experience, and I certainly did feel a shift, like I say, with the previous administration in terms of the hatred that was empowered. It was unfortunate to see that happening.
Truly, truly. Yeah, thank you so much for your disclosure. So my question now is along the legislative line, if you will, and that is that, right now there are about 44 LGBTQ bills that are being considered right now. So my question is, if you could speak, if you had all of those legislators in a room at one time, what would you tell them in terms of what they should take into consideration as they pass laws?
Now, are you speaking specifically about the laws banning the youth from sports, or just kind of in general?
In general, I was going to follow on with youth and
Okay.
sports as my
Okay.
follow-on question.
So yeah, it does seem like, right now, transgendered individuals are being targeted. But so there's a lot of hatred going on right now, and a lot of misinformation. I think, I am not involved. So my lane is spirituality. I'm a minister. That's like my jam. That's where I'm coming from. I'm not involved in legislative activity other than, donating to causes and voting. So I can't speak with total authority on this, but I will say that I know that a lot of what I'm seeing out there is a combination of fear and ignorance combined, which is never a good thing. Those two, no, don't play well together, right? So there's just a lot of misinformation, misunderstanding about transgender people, right? When there was a whole bathroom thing, this myth that it's like these men in dresses, there's just like so much misinformation about trans people. And I think just the first thing is we need to educate ourselves, right? And kind of like with how white people need to educate ourselves about white privilege and not ask all BIPOC people, like, please tell me everything. It's like, there's an awful lot of information out there that we can use to educate ourselves. Now, if you're fortunate to have someone in your life who does identify as trans, in that umbrella, and any trans male, trans female, non-binary, whatever it is, and is willing to have a conversation with you, great. But there's a lot of information you can get on your own to educate yourself about this. And I'm still educating myself, right? It doesn't end. There's not a place, right? Because, for example, the whole non-binary, that whole, wing of the trans experience is newer. There's folks who are like identify more in the binary, trans male, trans female, who don't really understand the non-binary experience and have to educate themselves, right? So there's just so much education needed, and it can come in a lot of forms. There's a great show on Netflix called Pose that's about the ballroom community in the 90s and 80s and 90s in New York. There's movies, there's TV, there's fiction. There's a lot of ways you can educate yourself that are illuminating and fun, dare I say fun, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that there's a lot of education needed, and it's the ignorance and fear that are pushing these bills and just creating strife and problem and exclusion where it's really not necessary.
Yeah.
but I also think consciousness is evolving, and this is part of it. Unfortunately, it's
Yeah.
part of how we're evolving is through mistakes, misunderstandings.
We have to become aware in some way, and unfortunately, that often is the way that our desire to even become even more aware
Right.
occurs. So let's do talk about, the laws that are impacting young children and sports, and in particular, girls.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, there's an awful lot of misinformation out there because there are trans women, for example, participating in sports right now. So the NCAA, the National College Athletic Association, and the Olympic Committee have standards and rules about this. So this is not a brand new thing.
Yeah.
This is not a brand new thing. And so it's like there's all kinds of ways. I mean, trans girls are girls. I think that's part of the misinformation too, right? And the lack of education. It's like people see a trans girl as not a girl, see a trans girl as a boy. And so that alone creates a problem. So that's a disconnect right there. But there's no, it's discrimination. It's allowing fear to allow hate and misinformation rather than science. We can look to the experts in terms of the NCAA and the Olympic Committee to have criteria. And one of the things I have learned in terms of my education about this, transgender women do not have an inherent competitive advantage over cisgender women, right?
Yeah.
Who knows? They're acting as if that's not the case. And also the harm that it does to kids, It's saying it's okay to discriminate. It's okay to be exclusionary. It's okay to not respect and listen to you and who you are. It's okay to not take care of you, right? So again, fear and ignorance, unhappy marriage. And I think that a lot of people, myself included, are needing to educate themselves because of this. And so I'm an optimist. I do believe in the long run that truth wins out. And unfortunately, I think trans people seem to be in some ways where gay folks were a while back, where it was like the latest scapegoat.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, there's all kinds of folks out there who are experiencing discrimination,
Yes.
not just gay and trans. But right now, in terms of the LGBTQ community, there's an awful lot of misinformation and unfortunately legislation that's targeting these folks who are just trying to live their lives
Exactly.
and just be themselves.
Yes. Has the ban on healthcare impacted you personally?
Nope. Again, privileged person. Yeah. So no, it has not.
Okay.
I want to say fortunately, but it's also there's so many people who have been negatively impacted, so it's hard to ignore that part. Yeah.
Understood. So my final question, Z, is this: what is your favorite thing about being gender rich?
Thank you for asking that question, and I appreciate your reference to trans joy earlier, because I read an article recently that was talking about that, right? It was talking about, it's actually referring to Elliot Page, who has come out recently as a trans male in the media, and they were talking about how so much of the coverage is focusing on the pain and how hard it's been. And it's like, there are so many freaking cool things about being trans for me, about being gender rich. Living outside a binary that so many people live in and take for granted is kind of like going through the looking glass, really. Like, I feel like when I finally came out and embraced my gender rich identity and expression, I became more empowered in my femininity and my masculinity than I had before. I have a wife, she's cisgendered. People always assume like I'm the boy, I'm the, tough one, and she's the girl. It's like, no, I'm actually the delicate flower, right? So I feel like I have access to the whole range of my gender expression because of who I am. And also, it's just me. It's just who I am. When I was 20 years old and living alone from the first time, that's when I first acknowledged this. And this is like several decades ago now, right? So it's just me. It's how spirit created me in this lifetime. And so I know that by owning and expressing my authentic gender expression, just my authentic expression, I'm giving other people permission to do the same. Um, and it's just fun. It's fun. Like I say, my lane is spirituality. So I'm expressing myself as spirit made me. And I love seeing other people do the same, whatever that expression is, not just along the lines of gender, whatever that expression is. When you see someone in their joy and their authenticity, it's contagious, it's infectious, right? It's like, it empowers us all. And that's all I can do. It's me. I can live my life as authentically as possible and lift up as many other people as I can to do the same.
Absolutely. So it is a pleasure. We're getting a little background noise here. I don't know what that is, but it's been a pleasure spending time with you and getting to see you. It's been a while. So I want to thank you so much for your time, for your honesty, for your sharing. And as you say, it is fear that causes people to behave the way that they do when it is anti other people, and it precludes other people from having the rights and entitlements that they deserve just by virtue of being human.
For sure. And thank you, Reverend Michele. I say Reverend Michele because I know you in our ministerial context. Thank you, Michele, for all the work. Thank you for having this program. And also thank you for all the work that you are doing in the world to ensure equality and justice for all. So I really appreciate that as well.
Thank you so much.